everyone, Carolyn here from We Teach Well. Today we're going to be talking about the digital divide in education. We're privileged to be joined by four amazing educators who can offer important perspectives on what we have and what we need in going forward. They are Ruth Smith, Head of Department of Teaching and Learning and Middle Years Program Coordinator at Callum Vale Community College in Queensland. With her and also from Callum Vale is David Swanson, the Indigenous Liaison Officer at the school. Associate Professor David Zyngier from Southern Cross University, who was also joined us for the Digital Divide session last year, and Dr. Sandy Nicoll, an education consultant with Nicoll Education. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land of which I work, the Yalukit Weelam clan of the Boonwurrung, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. We also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which our guests work. We acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship to the land. So last year, we talked about what we were learning in relation to students and their access to education technology. We talked about the surprise shown by some when they discovered that not all young people were tech natives with devices. And we talked about the ramifications this will have globally and locally. When people assume that every school student is tech savvy, when they're not, we are maintaining a system that sets many young people up to fail. It can have a significant effect on their work opportunities and their ability to navigate an increasingly virtual society. As always, it is students and families in areas of low socioeconomic status that fare the worst. Obviously, funding is a problem. We have seen a consistent growth of public funding to private schools who already have plenty of money, and a corresponding drop to public schools, many of which don't even have the basic requirements. We need to fix this. We need to find both systemic and on-the-ground answers to the issues. And I would argue that we're past the time for strategies. We've gone beyond that. We need action in order to correct a growing imbalance. Each of the panelists speaking today have firsthand knowledge of what inequality in our schools look like. So to begin, I'm going to get each of them to give a brief comment on their current context. And I'd like to start with David Zyngier, who is a strong proponent of public education and has spent many, many years fighting the battle for educational equality. So, David.
Well, what stands out to me, especially now under the fact that so many of our students are not in schools but are learning at home, or not learning at home but are at home trying to learn. I discovered this morning that only 88% of all homes in Australia are actually connected to the internet. That means 12%, and those 12% are our most disadvantaged, our rural, remote and Indigenous kids do not have access to internet. So if they are, the only way that they can get access to internet is through a hotspot on a mobile phone. That's assuming they have a mobile phone and a plan that can actually enable that connection. And that assumes, of course, that they're living in somewhere that is close enough to a tower to get reception.
That's right.
And reception that enables this kind of work that we are doing together right now. Now, I've had the pleasure of having two of my older grandchildren at home last week because their parents are essential workers, and I had to supervise their learning. Now, they're privileged kids. We've got NBN Wi-Fi here. They brought their own Chromebooks from school along with them. And if they didn't have their Chromebooks, well, I've got my own laptops that I could have shared with them. Yeah. Privileged. But we need to think about something that struck me, an article that was in The Guardian week, and it talked about how much money private schools received as part of JobKeeper.
Mm.
Now, one school alone, Wesley College here in Melbourne, a very, very wealthy school that charges over $35,000 per annum for its students, last year received $20 million in JobKeeper. And it's one of many schools. And I've got other schools here that Mariah College in Sydney that received $9.4 million. King's College in Sydney, $2.5 million. St Leonard's in Brighton in Melbourne received $5.5 million of JobKeeper.
Mm.
Just the $20 million that Wesley received in JobKeeper, and it didn't need it because they actually declared a surplus last year.
I saw that, yeah.
They declared a surplus last year at about $600 for an entry, a Chromebook. That would have supplied 30,000 disadvantaged students with a printer and a Chromebook.
Yeah.
30,000 students. So our country has gone crazy in the support for private schools. Public schools, of course, got none of this. Here in Victoria, some kids were given dongles to enable them to access the internet on a Chromebook. Every school endeavoured to give kids Chromebooks or old iPads that they could connect with.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is that there are at least 12% of Australian homes that are not connected in any way or form to the internet. So that's 12% of our most disadvantaged kids who are becoming further disadvantaged.
Yeah,
Exactly. How could we should not be surprised when we find that we've got a very, very long tail of underperformance, underachievement, that our politicians keep hammering our teachers and say, you're not doing enough. You're not doing enough because these kids are failing. And I believe you mentioned the word fail before. One of my favourite teachers says there's no such thing as failure, only a first attempt in learning.
Yeah, love it. I like that.
But we are actually failing our most disadvantaged, our Indigenous kids, the regional kids, the rural and remote kids, and the kids in our western suburbs who are doubly struck with COVID disease because of their particular demographics. The fact that their parents are all essential workers, can't work from home, they're not university trained, or they have qualifications from overseas that are not recognised here. So they have to work in a factory, they have to work in delivery, they have to work in cleaning. So they're doubly locked down. Parents aren't home to help them. And even if the parents were home,
would they be able to?
First language is possibly not English. They've probably not had much education themselves. And so what we find, even with Victoria crowing about its excellent NAPLAN results from last year, we still haven't dived deeply into those results to see which groups are performing well and which groups are underperforming. And we can be assured of what the results will show when we have a deep dive into that.
Which I would imagine would show that a lot of students in those low SES groups wouldn't have sat NAPLAN last year.
Yeah, they may not have even sat NAPLAN.
That's right.
Their performance will be low, but those students who are learning at home with teachers who were well prepared, with resources that were more than adequate, with parents at home who were able to supervise their learning, they actually went ahead.
Of course, yeah.
My grandchildren, as I talked about them last week, they were finished all their schoolwork by 11 o'clock. And we spent the rest of the day painting and doing music and doing some running around, etc., and having a good time. They got their work done because they had the supervision and the support that they required to do it.
Yeah, I have a nephew with ADHD, and while he didn't like the virtual learning because he loved school, he actually did better. He got a lot more done. when he wasn't in the classroom. It does make a difference. Now, Ruth and David, you are at a school in Queensland which runs the International Baccalaureates program, which I personally love a lot. And it's a public school, not a private school. Can you talk a little bit, first of all, Ruth, and then David, about the divide in your context?
Our school is quite interesting because according to our ICSIA, we are Middle Australia. So we have students who are low SES background who, did struggle to have a device. And I also teach on a half teaching load. So some of my students in my classes, even though we're a bring your own device school, they're not financial enough to be able to afford a device. So that can be really difficult in a class to be able to, there's one or two kids without a device and, they know that their parents can't afford it. They look around and they see their peers learning on their devices and accessing content and things like that. And it further highlights the inequality. And it does it almost in a public manner in front of the kids in the class, which is really hard. So that's one perspective. And although we have the International Baccalaureate here, our philosophy is very much that we offer it as we feel that the philosophy is intended to all students of all different backgrounds and all walks of life. And we do it through a manner which is equitable for all students. So some of our students, they struggle financially, but they get through the end of it, and that's a fabulous thing. We do have a significant population of students whose first language is not English. We have some refugee students who are here as well. So we have, I believe it's 66 different language groups from over 100 different nations. So there's a lot of diversity here in our school. And access to, I think there's an assumption often that sits with learning online and things like that. If we give it to them, we provide it to them, then they will come and learn. But how in the first place do they access it? If we're sending instructions home by email, we're making the assumption that the parents have access, that the parents can actually read the emails and have the time to do so. Some of our experiences, and I know we're in Queensland, so we're fortunate not to have been as locked down as other states, but particularly in the extended time period last year, we found that some of our kids just dropped off. We didn't see them at all for that time period. And understanding the narratives behind why that is the case. It's not just about access. It's not just about you not having the internet or whatever else. It might be, and one parent contacted us and said, hey, look, I've got one laptop and I've got 4 kids. We chose deliberately to offer asynchronous learning for equity purposes. It's not okay to expect that all kids are going to be able to access their own device at a number of private schools, and they're continuing to do this, and to do Zoom, because that just doesn't happen. A lot of our parents work in essential jobs, so they're out working, and often the kids that we see in middle school or the middle years up into senior years have to look after their younger siblings. So their access or lack of access is determined by their family responsibilities. We also saw some parents lost their jobs. So in order for the family to survive, the young person went out and got extra shifts at Coles or Woolies or something else like that. And then they're financially supporting their family and they're taking care of siblings. That leaves little time to access online learning. So there's a diversity of narratives that sit behind the why of access, and it's not just about hardware and software and Wi-Fi access and things like that, although that can be an issue. I remember last year we were looking at programs where the government was supposed to provide laptops for kids going into this, and the words were very nice. The laptops would have been better. So it was not timely. It was not done in a manner which helps support neither the students nor the kids, because we make this assumption that our kids are tech savvy But I still get kids who are like, how do I log on? Where do I get my password from? What do I do if my password doesn't work? And all the very baseline questions, and teaching them the routines and processes that enable them to use devices appropriately. It's not just enough to say, hey, here's a laptop, off you go. There's a lot of learning and routines that sit around that. A lot of the things that we take for granted in our lives of privilege that need to be taught by a teacher, by somebody sitting beside you, to be able to go, hey, this is the key that you press and this is what it needs to look like. It's very difficult to do it online. And it's made doubly so if your first language is not English.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of complexity that sits around this issue. And David works with our Indigenous families at the college. We are an urban school, so we sit in Brisbane's south side, but we still experience a lot of the issues that other schools may have issues with, who might be a little bit more, regional or something like that. Yeah.
And that's where I thought maybe, David, can you talk to that? You do work with the Indigenous students at the school?
Yeah, absolutely. So our First Nations population is about 5% of our school, so not overly a massive amount, but I guess the biggest driver for me in this position over the last year has been attendance. Driving up their attendance. The importance of school in culture is something that definitely needs to be driven. But when a student is told to stay home and here's the access, here's the tools to use it, with no drive behind that, I guess that makes it quite difficult. Monitoring attendance and bringing up attendance is my first and foremost goal. But when the COVID instruction came in, we couldn't pressure it. If you're sick, you're sick. You got a sniffly nose, you stay home. You know what I mean? I asked if I could do front lawn yarns with my students, but I couldn't, because that's putting them in danger, being quite a vulnerable community. Having chats to the parents about the expectations on them, a lot of them felt that they had to become teachers overnight, which is not the case. We give as many tools as we can, but again, accessing those tools is quite difficult, quite challenging. But yeah, I guess the attendance was probably my biggest hurdle, along with everything else that's been discussed. I mean, I've ordered or asked for laptops from an external organisation, and they're doing their best to get it to us, but these things take time, and there's a new lockdown tomorrow. We're quite fortunate to be in Queensland at the moment, but I think, as we were talking about before this actual meeting, you mentioned that it only takes one person to start a new outbreak, and it could be tomorrow, it could be in 2 weeks' time. But preparation for that, I don't have those laptops still, and I asked for weeks ago. But this company, who's doing a very nice thing for us, organising laptops for these disadvantaged students, is a wonderful thing that they're doing. But getting our hands on them is quite difficult.
Sorry, I had myself on mute there. One of the things that interests me, and we'll just move over to Sandy first. Now, Sandy, you've done quite a bit of work on initial teacher education.
I certainly have. So before I start, just like to acknowledge I'm on Dakin Young Country. So I've had a really interesting year since I was not last on the panel last year. So my research with people in China and how teachers taught online in China during their lockdown in August last year. But yes, my background predominantly is first in families, pretty much with university. That's a spot that hits at my heart, and low SES pre-service teachers. So they are on my mind all the time. But also just social justice and the lack of access. So I was very humbled 2 weeks ago when I was asked to join a panel at a university in Pakistan, and there was university members or professors from India, Turkey, Afghanistan and Pakistan. And they had access to Zoom, but they couldn't do the Zoom with the video. So we actually just talked to the screen, and I believe there was 500 people there. I didn't see a soul. I just saw my pink box every time I spoke. But it really humbled me to think that these people know they don't have access to digital technologies. That's not going to stop them. So, and they worked out ways to present, which blew my mind. I was just so honoured to be part of that panel. And it makes me also very mindful of low SES with pre-service teachers in particular, because they're not wealthy. These are not from wealthy families. They're trying their hardest to actually get out of, I think, poverty. And I do recall recently one student, she didn't have access, like what you're saying, David. And so I was as flexible as I possibly could be, because often she would have to be in a car borrowing someone's phone to study and things like that. And there was no way I was going to let her drop out if it was because of technology. So I was going to do whatever I could to help her. And then even in China itself, when we did the study of teachers in China, it was really interesting because they have the same problems that we have. So, and that digital divide, it's really, quite daunting. So my passion has now turned into becoming an advocate for pre-service teachers in particular, because I truly believe they're not being given a fair go anymore. Policy is squashing them. The agency does not exist for many of them. And so, currently that's where I'm really advocating, because I truly believe this. If we empower them and believe in them and let them work out how their wings are going to best work, how they are going to best teach, we will produce a far superior teaching force, which is what we need. So we need that pre-service teachers to be confident. I meet so many of them that are not confident, because I teach predominantly mathematics and creative arts, and they are so fearful of these subjects. But when you empower them and tell them that you believe in them, their whole mindset changes. So that's
Thanks. What I was wondering is, are there things that have been around for a while, like inequities that have been around for a while, but we really didn't work out just how much until the pandemic? So things that actually weren't working, but we just didn't realize they weren't working.
Well, look, I'll chime in first here, Carolyn. I want to share an example. So in a suburban Melbourne school, where the teachers and the principal recognise and acknowledge this divide, this digital divide, the school set up postbox outside the school gate during lockdown for prep 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Each class had their own postbox, and each morning a parent on their 1 or 2 hour going out would come to the school, pick up the child's work for the day and take it home, and the next day deliver the child's work and pick up the next lot of work. I mean, there are ways of overcoming this community cooperation. You know, so it's a bit old school, but it's good school. Things like disasters, whatever they are, whether it's bushfires or floods or droughts or a pandemic, expose the weak underbelly.
Yeah.
And it brings to the fore, it shines a light on the inequities in our society. Whereas normally we have a take for granted kind of attitude that assumes everyone's working, everyone has a home, everyone has food, everyone has shelter and clothing, and a loving place to go to. But under extremists, under the pandemic or any other disaster, nationally or locally, all of a sudden we see that there are lots of homeless people, there are families without work, there are families without food, and we start to recognise these because we need to provide for them. Because normally it's left up to voluntary organisations, charitable organisations, churches, the Salvation Army, and so on, to pick up those pieces. But during a disaster, no one can pick up the pieces except for the government. And we've seen the failings of that.
Oh gosh, yes.
Time after time, through the bushfires and the floods and now the pandemic, that we don't live in a fair go society. Our society is based on inequity and based on injustice. And until we solve those critical issues, we're unfortunately going to have kids who are always going to be having trouble learning what they need to learn, to give them the opportunity to find a fulfilling and successful life.
Oh, that leads beautifully into another question. This is the easy one. What issues do you think are systemic and which ones might just be environmental or contextual? Don't all rush in at the same time.
That's right. I think personally, well, first of all, I would like to say what's been uncovered. I believe people have finally realised that teachers actually work more than 9 to 3. So I think that's been a wake-up call for pretty much 99% of the nation. My concern is it will be soon forgotten if when we get back to normality, whatever that will be in the future. Is it systemic? 100%. So the loss of agency of teachers really hits at my absolute core, because the loss of agency and all this red tape in policy now with accreditation and following the soft skills that we talk about with the TALIS reports from OECD, teachers have been stopped from actually succeeding during COVID because of red tape. All right, and that's benchmarking, was supposedly called benchmarking. I don't actually think that actually is benchmarking. I think it's pulling us down. It's it's an anchor on every teacher's leg, and it's dragging them down, that they have to focus on stuff that is not helping agency for them and not helping agency for the students that they're teaching, because they have to follow this box. They have to tick this box. Well, to me, it's clearly shows that AITSL is a body that is political. And people are not, there's not a statutory declaration in terms of requirements of who is on the board. And so because we don't have classroom teachers on the board, yeah, we have school leaders, we don't actually have classroom teachers on the board, there's no way they will ever understand what their red tape is actually doing in the classrooms. So, and until we change it, and I know we've talked about that, flip the system, I've got the book behind me, but we need to really agitate now more than ever for the benefit of our students and our classroom teachers. And I just think that and if we don't embrace this chance with COVID, it'll be such a shame, because now is the time where the government's going, oh, we've made a mistake here, we've made a mistake here. They're probably for the very first time willing to actually listen to teachers. And that's something that's really strong in my heart.
Yeah, if we can take it back just to the digital components, I'd like to sort of approach that again about systemic versus environmental. Ruth, do you want to jump in? Or
yeah, sure. I think one of I think David mentioned a number of assumptions, and I think that one of the assumptions to do with this and everything that's come with the pandemic is around the use of ICTs in learning, that it's the best way to learn. Our school's a BYOD school, and the assumption is if you bring along a device, then the kids are going to be using it for everything. We need to be careful of the way that we engage with tools, because kids still need to be able to read text in a paper book. They need to be able to write. Just because we have the tools does not necessarily mean that they're the best tool for every situation. Just like David, I'm, multiple roles here. I think we all have multiple roles here. I've got 2 sons, and last year they were at a private school. I will say that they are no longer at private schools. Last year they were at private schools and doing Zoom online learning and things like that. one of my sons loved it. It was fantastic. He got all of his work done, which meant that he could play games online with his mates when he finished, which is probably not the purpose of it, but anyway. And I think as well, side note, it gives them an opportunity to get up to all sorts of interesting mischief online, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. My second and older son found it really, really challenging. He's a person who needs people. And I think one of the best things that we learnt from the pandemic is that we need people, and some people really need people. My son needs someone beside him to help explain things to him. And he just crashed. It was an unhappy disaster. You know, the tools that he needed were not the online tools. Even with the asynchronous learning, it wasn't great. So, you know, I think we need to consider that, yes, online learning and all those sorts of things, it's convenient and all the rest of it. But I think in some ways it disadvantages kids even further. It exacerbates that divide, because it's not only about kids who have physical and digital access, it's also about kids who can learn in that environment, who value that environment and have the assistance at home to be able to do that. So yeah, I digress. But anyway, and the online learning, as I have discovered with my second son again, really does give the kids opportunities to utilize technologies in very creative ways to subvert what the learning's actually about.
Oh gosh, yes.
So, you know, some of the things that went on, it was really difficult to police from a parent perspective. It's like, what are you doing? You're hijacking somebody else's class from another school or whatever else. I know that you know, Zoom was a problem for his school. We're not in Education Queensland, we don't use Zoom because it's not an approved tool for students. But a lot of the private schools were using Zoom, and you can do all sorts of interesting and possibly not great stuff with Zoom. So it's additional security issues and things like that. There are so many different complications with it. So
hence the discovery of waiting rooms on Zoom. Yeah, David, you've got your hand up there.
Yes, thank you. I'll put my hand
Sorry,
up.
I need to differentiate between the Davids.
It's okay. I think Ruth touched on a number of issues, and Sandy as well. I think the core thing that we have learned here is that the best learning takes place in the classroom with a classroom teacher.
Yeah.
A fully qualified, well-resourced classroom teacher, and who is not teaching out of their subject area. Too many teachers are forced to teach out of their subject areas.
Field, yeah.
Out of field teaching is endemic in our society, and that is, it's an environmental but also structural issue that needs to be overcome. But one thing we can take away from what Ruth has just been talking about her two sons being different, that while it's so important to have a teacher with the children in the classroom, and I purposely had to stop myself by saying in front of the classroom, because the teacher shouldn't be in front of the classroom, but is part of the classroom geography, if you like, the environment. But sometimes particular children need to either have individualised help within the classroom or individualised help outside of the classroom. When I visited Finland many years ago, went to primary and secondary schools in the town of Jyväskylä, which is Jyväskylä University is the major teaching university in Finland. And I hopped on a bicycle and just took myself out to various schools, introduced myself at the front desk, and students took me around. And as I was walking around, I saw kids leaving the classroom. And I asked my student guides, where are they going? Are they going to the toilet, going for a smoke or whatever they're doing? They said, no, they're going down to the end of the corridor. And at the end of the corridor, there is a special ed teacher who is there to solve their problems without interrupting the classroom. The kids, if they don't understand, they don't have to put up the hand and break the teacher's flow or the classroom's flow. They just go out, get their problem solved, come back into the classroom and carry on. Now, we need to take those kinds of things on board, and those things require resources. They are the resources that private schools who are charging $30,000, $25,000 plus can afford to bring into the classroom. But in our public school system, we have too many teachers who are teaching out of field, too many teachers who are not confident, as Sandy said before, in teaching numeracy, in teaching the arts, in teaching science. They don't have the confidence, they don't have the abilities or the skills. And so we've got to help them provide that. And that's one of the big lessons I think that we can take away from COVID, that we once again have to learn that one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah.
That in a classroom, if we've got 30 children, we've got 30 different kinds of learners.
Yeah, it's the out of field thing's interesting because what we are doing is looking at coaching for out of field English teachers. And I had a session with Ruth, who I'm going to throw to now, who has been out of field teaching English for 20 years, I believe she said. Do you want to jump in, Ruth?
Yep, I will. I'll just have to put my hand down in a second. I was going to jump on what David said. The private school that my sons went to actually had far less support than the public school that we're at in terms of people to support their literacy and numeracy and things like that, which I think is part of the non-selective selective process, that, you know, if you have an issue and you keep falling further and further behind, you may end up going someplace else to be able to get the help that they need. We're very lucky in the fact that we actually do have significant support for our students in many, many different ways. But that support exists here at school. So when I'm doing my online learning, for example, with my classes, differentiation is actually very difficult. So how do I support my kids that I would normally be able to move to in the class, or have, you know, someone who's a teacher aide who assists our EALD students? How do I do that when I'm doing online learning and the volume of stuff that we produce and design and create so that kids can access it? In many ways, that type of learning further disadvantages students because they don't have access to the support they need, or the special classes and things that they need to be able to do that. So yeah, that's a really tricky one for kids who are you know, who have disabilities, or for kids who struggle with English as a language, or for kids who have literacy and numeracy issues and things like that. It makes it really, really tough to access the support that they need. So they just fall further and further behind, no matter what you do. And it would be great in an ideal world to be able to, you know, have 3 or 4 different lessons to be able to send out to our kids, to be able to support their learning. The reality is, it's actually, in some ways, it's actually harder to do online than it is to do in the classroom.
Yeah.
So, and yes, I have been teaching out of area for 20 years. I have no English qualifications whatsoever, but love the subject dearly.
As you should. It is the best subject.
Yeah. But it's such a struggle. We see, as in my capacity as head of department teaching and learning, you know, we see so many teachers struggle with this because the needs of the, you know, the economic needs of the school, in terms of timetabling, in terms of filling classes and things like that, really do outweigh the, you know, the learning needs, I guess, of some of our young and early career teachers. So yeah, it's more inequity, I guess. Yeah. And they often have to get chucked in the deep end to be able to do that, as well as the suite of skills that they need to employ around literacy and numeracy and use of ICTs and differentiation and
yes.
all of those sorts of things. So yeah, and I know so many of my colleagues during this during the lockdowns, they work so hard. the amount of hours that they put into producing the content, answering kids' questions, because we have kids who are regularly emailing us all the time, and you get email after email after email after email, and parents contacting us, can you reset the passwords, can you help us out with this, can you, there's just a suite of things, and then you read through and check kids' work to make them feel that, we are actually interacting, it's not just busy work that we're giving them. It's really, really difficult.
That's where artificial intelligence, Ruth, is where we should be looking. We should be forging ahead with artificial intelligence to work out these admin things at the moment I was getting, before I left unis, I was getting 80 emails a day, and artificial intelligence could have actually answered a lot of that. People say, well, go to, for example, on Blackboard for university or, iLearn. No, artificial intelligence can be set up with an algorithm to solve this, because your soft skills are being pulled apart. That's what I mean by policy and red tape, because that's where we can actually help teachers by taking away those things that are these soft skills that can be fixed up with the algorithm. So
in saying that, I mean, that is, I mean, I understand where you're going with that, but if you've got schools where on day 8, they discover how many teachers they're allowed for the year, and some of those teachers are full-time admin or doing other things, it doesn't, artificial intelligence is not where they need to put, is not where they're going to put their money, because that in itself is a learning curve that can't be done immediately. And that's what I want to go to next, after we've spoken to David, both Davids, is what can we do? What can we do? But first of all, David Swanson, on the thing that we've been talking about, how do you think Indigenous students are being affected by these issues?
Yeah, listen, most of my success comes with my connection to the student, and that's lost in a digital environment. As hard as you try to connect online, and as Ruth was saying before, we don't have access to a lot of Zoom. Was not a possibility for us. So a lot of mine were phone calls, if I could ever get an answer, emails to students, emails to parents. There was a lot of expectation on a parent to automatically become a teacher. I would chat to them on the phone. They were like, oh, I'm expected to teach. And I was like, no, you're not. We've got the tools here. The teachers are backing you up. All we want you to do is get the student focused on what they're actually doing. So, which is a challenge in itself. These parents are being instructed to stay at home, keep their students at home, but the education is not a high priority to them. It's a legal requirement, but it's not a priority. So, trying to get the kid to focus is difficult in itself. And then on top of that, becoming the expert in, whatever subject they're looking into on top of that. And then they're coming to me. I'm not the expert either, but I can link them to the experts at least. But I guess that was the major struggle from them.
I was interested, a few times you'd hear people say that I've got my own work to do and I'm supposed to look after my children, which I personally don't think's unreasonable. But then I said, well, how do you think your child's teacher is doing? Because that teacher is teaching your child, but they're also managing their education of their own children.
Right.
And so you've got a sort of two-ended thing where the poor teacher in the middle is being stretched even further than they have previously been stretched.
Yeah.
Could I jump in? Could I jump in here, Carol?
Of course you can.
Issue. Thank you. I think teachers have been too hard on themselves, and I just thought of a term. Instead of us talking about home learning, we should be take a leaf out of the job keeper and call it learning keeper.
Yeah.
What what we've been forced to do under lockdown is to actually keep the kids attached to their learning, to keep in touch with them. We need to recognise that teachers, no matter how much time and effort they put into preparation of digital lessons, it's not going to be the same quality as if the child was with you in the classroom. There's not that interaction that's taking place, or the interaction is very different. And I know this from my own personal experience, being forced to teach online at a university level. And even with willing participants who have paid for their education in a master's level course, half of them don't turn up. They say we'll listen to it afterwards because it's been recorded. Or if they turn up, their screens are on with blank with no camera, so you don't know whether they're there. And just trying to get them to participate and create innovative, excellent online sessions for mature age students who are knowledgeable is really difficult. Or at a primary and secondary level, it's even harder. So I think that we need to be a little bit more kind to ourselves, a bit more gentle, and talk about learning keeper. In other words, keeping the children in touch with each other, letting them socialise, in touch with their teacher and their classroom. And if there's a bit of learning on the side, that's a bonus. Pasi Solberg said it really well in an article just this week, where he's got 2 primary kids at home that he's supervising, home learning, and he said, they don't finish their work. Not a problem, not a problem, as long as they're well, as they're happy, as long as they can play, and if they could see their friends. I think they're the most critical things. And the NAPLAN results show here in Victoria, at least on a broad level, that all those fears about us going backwards has not occurred. And even if we did go backwards, it's 1 year out of 13, 2 years out of 13. It's
I wrote about, sorry.
A long time to catch up.
Yeah.
Having taught in Mount Druitt for a long time, that academic yield, the kids catch up because when they are engaged, they engage and they learn quickly. So I do, this moral panic is very unhelpful for parents, unhelpful for students, and we wonder why the mental health has gone through the roof for these poor people at home, because they're feeling pressured that, like one of the studies I've read, not with COVID, but before COVID, where the whole idea is parents see this as their one, if I don't get this right with education, my child's life's ruined. Well, that's just not the case. And this moral panic is not helping anyone. And I think the media should be held accountable for it, because it's not appropriate to be doing that when we're already seeing Lifeline is having the record number of calls, people losing their jobs left, right and centre. And the last thing a parent needs to know is, well, now you're unemployed, now you're not a good parent as well. It just doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't.
Ruth,
you've got your hand up there.
I was going to jump in and say, David, particularly with regards to teachers and being kinder to yourselves, one of the things that was great about our school was that our principal is very much very concerned about her people, and we learned very much from the last lockdown. Look, we don't design lessons that go for the full 70 minutes. We design lessons that go for 35 minutes. She encourages us to set and communicate office times. So we will look at and answer emails within these different times, and she'll back us on that. So she's very much about the well-being of the staff, as well as the well-being of the students, and making sure that they're not trying to get through mountains and mountains of work. So that, she was just like, we need to just keep everyone, as you said, David, connected to their learning, and just keep them in there, not demoralise them by going, here's this mountain of work that you have to do and get through, or demoralise the parents, which actually creates more conflict at home when we really don't need it. So, and, you know, fairly simple tasks so that there's no, you know, enormous burden on the families to be able to do that. Interestingly, I did, the last lockdown that we had, I operated one of my classes through Teams. They were my Year 11 Theory of Knowledge class. And a fantastic subject.
Yeah, a little bit of teaching jealousy here, I have to say.
And most of the session was about connection and hearing from them what they were up to. They showed me how to use like the gallery function or whatever it is. Oh no, the together mode function on Teams. So we had this like photo of all of us that we published online. And had a laugh. The conversation was actually mainly around the approaches to learning that we had, or soft skills, as you were saying, Sandy. So we were talking about time management and not doing this at 2 o'clock in the morning, thank you very much. How do you manage your time? What does that look like? Where do you fit in with your jobs? How's your siblings and family going? How are we communicating? How are we, you know, doing all these sorts of things to keep ourselves sane? And you know, looking at, yes, we've got exams and things like that coming up, so we still need to be preparing for that just in case we come out of lockdown, and not losing sight of those things, which was important because that did happen. We came out of lockdown and we went into mock exams for the Year 12s, which is part of the components that, you know, obviously the component that we need for that. And the Year 11s, actually, no, we went Year 11s first and then Year 12. So the Year 11s basically came back, had a week, went straight into their exams. So we talked about study and how to study, what does that look like, and how to be independent with your study and all that sort of stuff. So I didn't teach that class per se online. I certainly didn't do it live. We had activities up there, but it was the personal connection that they missed. And this is actually the only class, and they only have it once a week, where they actually get to connect with the whole class. Otherwise, they're in separate subjects for the most part.
Areas, of course, yeah.
Yeah, so they loved it, and they talked about all sorts of interesting things. We had a pet show as well, so everyone brought their pets and put them up on the screen, and that's, you know, that's about authentic connection to people and the networks that need to come into play to support people. And I think that going back to one of the points before, one of the things that we've kind of lost along the way is this sense of community and the networks that we have to depend upon one another to be able to action these things. So a lot of the vulnerable populations that we have in school need connections not just to one organisation but to numerous organisations to be able to support them. And we've lost in some ways the family connections with extended families and stuff like that to be able to support people, because we no longer live you know, within 1 or 2 suburbs of one another.
Yeah.
And lockdown has exacerbated that. We no longer are connected in many ways to community organisations the way we perhaps were in the past. So we've lost that network of connections. And I know that, you know, we'll probably talk in a moment about what can we possibly do to help solve these problems. And those networks of connections are part of it. The connection to, because this is not just a school responsibility. And I know that the media likes to throw it back on schools and throw it back on teachers and bash teachers for what we're not doing in schools and all the rest of it. It's not necessarily a teacher problem and a school problem or a systemic problem. It's not a parent problem either. This is a problem which exists and is connected to so many different things, and so must the solution be. The connections must support the solution, and it's not just a one-sided solution that, you know, it's the responsibility of schools to do that.
That's a beautiful way to segue into the next question, which is, of course, we know about these things now. We're aware of what many of the problems are. Systemic issues can take a long time to correct, particularly when you're working in a federated space where there's mix-ups of who's responsible for what. But what can we implement now from what we've learned about what the problems are? Are there things that can be done on the micro level? Just those little things that teachers can do, or parents can do, or school leaders can do to start to close this gap. of disadvantage and divide amongst students? What can we do right now?
Well, the first thing that needs to be done is to ensure that every child in every school has the necessary resources, whatever they may be, at that time, at that particular circumstance, to continue their learning. And that usually takes money. Yeah. We hear too often, time and time again, from every federal Minister of Education since Christopher Pyne, schools are getting more money than they've ever had before, and money doesn't solve the problem. But in fact, all the research tells us two things. First of all, that schools are not getting more money. Some schools are getting more
money.
Of course, as a total pie, the pie keeps on growing because we've got more kids at school. Now, each kid who comes to a school brings with them an additional lump of money of about $12,000 in the public school system for primary and about $15,000 in the secondary school, in the high school system, in public schools. So, of course, as our population grows, the education budget grows as well. It hasn't grown commensurate to the number of children who are in our schools. In particular, it hasn't grown in the public sector. In fact, it's diminished in the public sector. The majority of public schools around Australia are at least 10% underfunded based on the student resource standing that is developed by the Federal Department of Education. And while on the other hand of the divide, if you like, the private school system are about 10% over
funded
SRS. Now, that's an easy fix, but a very difficult fix. It's a budgetary issue. It's an issue that is problematic, but it shouldn't be problematic because 65% of all our children go to public schools across Australia, and therefore 65% of voters would be in favour of the public school system. So it just needs to have a bit of courage from the federal government. So the first thing is resourcing. And I think principals need to be able to demand of their state and territory education ministers the resources that they require to adequately teach the children in front of them. And every school has a different requirement and they need to be met. And if those requirements are not met, then the blame needs to be sheeted home, not to the school, not to the teachers, and certainly not to the parents or the community, but to the education department that is ultimately responsible. And we saw not too long ago in the High Court of Australia, a group of young students by a nun who took the minister responsible for the environment to the High Court, and the High Court found that the Minister of the Environment had a duty of care to children. And I would like to see a similar case going to the High Court by parents and children
in public schools,
that the Federal Education Minister is responsible for the duty of care to ensure that every public school student in this country gets the resources that he and she requires to become a 21st century learner.
David Swanson, your response. What do you think is that we could do now? If you could choose one thing to do differently, what would it be?
It's difficult for me because, like I said, I base my assistance on a personal connection, and a lot of things were uncovered during the pandemic that I wasn't aware of because, you know, students may have been embarrassed or or too difficult for them to talk about. So family with devices, with when we're talking about digital divide, and yes, we can provide these devices, but students need the knowledge in regards to connection. They need the motivation behind actually getting on there and completing it, which isn't always available from their parents. Yes, they have a responsibility, but we look at different cultures. Like I said earlier, that it's not the number one priority in a First Nations perspective, I guess, for certain families for education. It's a legal requirement, so they're fulfilling it. And they do brilliantly at school, go home, and I'm no blame to the parents whatsoever at all. I'll touch on it again, that they're not educators. They need to be motivators. Yes, they need to step up. Yes, because there's a global pandemic going on. So in regards to what can be done differently is really, really difficult, because I do know they need that personal connection. But as Ruth was saying before, and I saw the pictures from her classroom, just the way that those classes were taught, the engagement was incredible. So I mean, I want to save the world. I want to go out to every single house, make sure everyone's set up, and, you know, make sure they've got the technology, the systems, the knowledge. The parents are able to put their hand up and ask for help. I guess that was the biggest thing for me, was closing that gap between the parent and the school, making them realise that they're not the teacher, that they have the tools there available.
And maybe that's one of the things that we need to have on the list of, well, how are we going to fix this, is what can we do to support and encourage parents and explain to them how what we're asking of them is going to help their child.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have an answer for that. I don't understand why we're not doing an ad campaign. Think about Slip, Slop, Slap. Think about all these ad campaigns that actually change the mindset of parents and kids. I do not understand why we're not doing mini ads to show parents how you can do things at home. It's on TV, all right? It's not on the internet, it's on TV, which most families have access to. I do not understand why common sense is not being utilised. It's an easy way of doing it. And I really would strongly encourage anyone that has power to do it.
Yeah, did you say common sense there?
Yes, I did.
Or did I mishear it? Sorry.
Yeah. My whole life is all I talk about is common sense. I'm not joking. I've sat at the bottom of universities for 16 years, and I look up and I just go, where is the common sense? Can you not see the common sense? Because I don't understand. I don't know why. There's so many things that could be so easily fixed that are not costly, that are easily done. But the problem is the leaders have to listen to the people down the bottom. In wherever we are, schools, anywhere, and until we have that going on, I can't see it improving. But seriously, why are we not doing ad campaigns that help parents with little mini, almost like little mini ads to show how to teach this part?
Well, I'm imagining that the first problem is going to be who's going to pay for them.
Well, in 2020, Carolyn, I started a campaign which was very successful. Mm-hmm. We actually had the ABC Kids channel devoted between 9 and 11 o'clock.
That's right.
Each day to online learning, because TV access is about 95% of the country.
Yeah.
And why on earth the federal government didn't take up that issue and get the best teachers come on board?
So Annabelle Asprey's watched me teach. And you know what she said? Sandy, I'm not allowed to show you teaching because of the red tape. She said, if I could, I would be putting teachers on now to model teaching. It's a policy issue. It's a policy issue.
But that ABC one, I mean, going on with David's, that is common sense. The problem was, of course, that while the ABC was being used brilliantly to provide teaching, there were certain governments who were trying to take away its funding at the same time, which of course makes things difficult. I realized that we have spoken for longer than I told you we would. But of course it is, I find this, this issue to be incredibly important, and not one of the things that I have discovered, and this is interesting, in the ed tech field, which I've been sort of attached to for the last 4 years. But because we worked with teachers, that wasn't a sort of popular ed tech thing. And you heard a lot of, you'd hear a lot about people making their tech teacher proof and talking about how, you know, tech's going to solve all these problems because teachers can't. And at the big EdTech conference that was on last week, I was really encouraged to hear one after another these leaders of education technology reminding us that teachers are the most important thing, and saying that it doesn't matter what tech we bring in, we have to support teachers, that you cannot separate good learning from teachers. And I found that incredibly encouraging, because that's not what they've necessarily been saying beforehand. So as we finish, we've got a genie in a lamp. Your number one wish, if you had it, go. David, let's go with you first, because you're in front
as I
of me
said,
here.
Adequate resources fit for purpose for each learner and each classroom and each school.
Absolutely. Thank you. David Swanson, you're next.
Open communication and understanding. I guess everyone on the same page. I work with a lot of external organisations and companies that had different rules when it came to COVID, understandably. But as you said, genie in a lamp, my number one wish is that everyone on the same page. If we're all shutting down, we shut down. We're all opening up, let's open up.
Yeah. And that's significant, because it wasn't what happened.
No, definitely not. And that was one of the major struggles, absolutely.
Ruth.
I would say connections, but also I would say tools which are able to be accessed for education and fit for purpose. So I've been to some of the EdTech conferences and it's fantastic, but the problem is that with the issues in terms of security and privacy that we have, they're fantastic. We can't use them.
That's right.
So we're limited in what we can do because of the design of the tools and because of the red tape that encircles our systems. It would be great to be able to access a wide variety of tools which are, student friendly, and be able to do so in an environment where kids do have access. So there's a resourcing issue, there's resourcing there as well. So absolutely, I agree with both Davids, and the connections between all members of the community, and that's not just the school community, but the wider community, even the connections between schools and universities, to be able to support learning with pre-service teachers, and be able to study those sorts of things as well, so that we can learn from this and move forward and not make some of the same mistakes as we go forward.
Well, I think you would be encouraged in the last, with the conference last week, where they're talking about the importance of teachers for the first time in a while, and also heavily talking about security, privacy, and all of those related issues to tech. And Sandy, your genie in a bottle. Are you cutting red tape? Yeah.
It's not hard to do. It means empowering people that that have not been trusted as much before. What I'm saying is teachers. All right. So it's about time we started trusting our teachers and cut the red tape.
How many layers of red tape there may be. I would like to thank you all very much for your time and your expertise. It's a big question, and hopefully we will keep asking it until we find answers to it. So this we'll be back next year to talk about it again, and I will keep talking about it until it doesn't exist anymore, or I die first.
Just remember to be kind and be gentle.
Be kind and be gentle, and take care of each other. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Karen.